Well, hello, good afternoon, welcome. Fantastic to see all you guys sitting here. So joyful at the prospect of learning about burying beetles. And it's my great pleasure to be here this afternoon to tell you about perhaps one of the most brilliant and fascinating insects on Earth, the burying beetle. I've been told I have to stand here for the purposes of filming. I usually pace about quite a bit, so if I move around, I'll try and stay here to keep Dave happy. All right, so let me introduce you to... So first of all, who's seen a burying beetle? Has anyone seen a burying beetle in real life? Fantastic. And has anyone... Where did you see the burying beetle? Did you see it in the daytime? Yes? Wow. Did you see it on a dead body? Yes. So usually they're around at night, and usually they're to be found near dead things. But the natural history of the burying beetle was first made famous... Could you push on the slide? Thank you. By this man here, who is a great French naturalist. He's called Jean-Henri Fabre. And you can see him here. He's looking a bit worn out because he's used so many long words to describe how brilliant the burying beetle is. So he says the most vigorous and famous of these expurgators of the soil is the burying beetle, so different from the cadaveric mob in dress and habits. For he is a gravedigger, a sexton. He buries a corpse entire on the spot in a cellar where the thing duly ripened will form the diet of his larvae. He buries it in order to establish his progeny therein. He makes a clearance of death on behalf of life. So that's very dramatic, quite hard to follow. So let me tell you what he's actually describing, which is the life cycle that's shown here. So the whole thing will spring into action in a couple of months when the burying beetles that have spent the winter in the soil will heat up, and this will bring the burying beetles back to life. And they start flying around trying to find a dead thing. So a small dead vertebrate like a mouse or a bird. And if they get lucky, they find one. And if they get really lucky, then another beetle will show up too and become their partner. And then together, they'll work together to make this dead body into a nest for their babies. And so what they do is they shave off the fur or feathers, they roll the flesh into a ball, and they bury it underground. And the whole time they're doing this, they're covering it with fluids from their mouth and from their bottom. And then while they're doing this, the female lays her eggs in the soil surrounding the dead body. And after a couple of days, they hatch, and they crawl to the nest, and they take up residence on the nest, and they start feeding themselves. And then the parents will feed them too, so that after about a week, there's nothing left except for a few bones. And at that point, the parents fly off to look for another dead thing to breed on. And the larvae crawl away into the soil, they become pupae, and then they become adults, and then the whole process starts again. And it takes around about 7 weeks. So this is an amazing animal for us to study. Could you advance the slide? Fantastic. And what we're going to do today is look at the challenges that the beetle faces in choosing to breed on a dead body. Now, so obviously, it seems like a great idea on the face of it, because there's never going to be a shortage of dead things to breed on. There's always going to be a dead mouse or a dead bird lying around somewhere. So that seems like a brilliant choice. But actually, there's all sorts of other things that might want to breed on that body too. And that presents a whole load of problems for the beetle. So we're going to start off by looking to see what happens to a dead body in the hours immediately following death, so you can get an idea of some of the problems that the beetle faces. So could you play the video, please? So this is speeded up film of a dead mouse. And what can you see happening? You can see that its abdomen is starting to swell up. It's like someone's pumping it up like a balloon. And that's because inside, all the microbes in the mouse's gut are proliferating like mad, building up pressure that gets so great, eventually the body wall bursts and fluids seep out, and at that moment the microbes start to take over the body seriously. And you can see that illustrated here by the spread of fungal mycelium. You see it coming all over the body. Here it comes. So they come from the soil surrounding the dead body, but there are also microbes growing that were on the body to start off with, or even within it. And they like to feed on the dead body too, and they like to breed on it. So this is a serious problem for the beetles that they have to cope with. Dave, could you stop the film? Thanks. So this is one problem that they face. They've got to deal with competition from microbes. But they've also got to deal with competition from other insects that would like to breed on the dead body. So things like blowflies, or even other species of burying beetle, because it turns out there's 4 or 5 species of burying beetle in every wood in the UK where they like to breed. So they also want to breed on the dead body. So any beetle that finds it has to see them off as well, otherwise they're not going to be able to breed successfully. So in my lab in Cambridge, we spent a lot of time being detectives, looking to see how the beetle solves this problem. And that's what we're going to do today. We're going to be detectives and march through all the different problems that the beetles have to face in solving the challenge of breeding on a dead body. So these are the challenges. How do we find a dead body in the first place? How do we hide a dead body? How do we defend a dead body from other insects or microbes? And then how do we use it to raise our larvae? All right, so let's just quickly show you our setup so you can imagine the kinds of experiments that we have to do. This is a trap. This is how we catch burying beetles. It's at one of our woods surrounding Cambridge. And we put in the bottom of that trap, we have some soil and a dead mouse, and we leave it hanging there, and we come back a week later, and then we usually find about 1 to 10 beetles in there. And then we take the beetles from our field site. This is another one at Wicken Fen. We take them to the lab, and each beetle gets its own personal little box, and we give them a name. We don't call them Bob or Fred. We give them a sciencey name like F27 or P48. And then when we want to breed them, we put them in a bigger box with some soil and a dead mouse, and we put the lid on, and we put it in a cupboard to simulate underground conditions. And then we come back a week later, and there's a whole bunch of larvae for us to measure and count and look at. So this is our setup in the lab where we do the experiments that I'll be describing to you in a minute. So this is our first problem. Okay, how are we going to find a dead body in this wood? So this is one of the woods where the beetle lives. Just imagine a tiny mouse has died somewhere, and our challenge is we've got to find it, and we've got to find it fast before any other insect does, so that we can use it to breed on. So has anyone got any ideas? How do you think you might find a dead body? And also remember, you're doing this at night, so you've got to find it in the dark. Yes, what do you think?
Use the senses.
Use your senses. What kind of senses? Seeing, looking. What other kinds of senses? Your nose, smelling. Yes, brilliant idea. Spot on. That's exactly what they do. So first of all, they fly around like mad, and we know from experiments in our lab that beetles are incredibly strong flyers, so they can fly for up to 8 kilometers at a time without taking a rest. So that means that they can search out every nook and cranny in a wood. And then while they're doing that, they've got the most extraordinarily sensitive antennae, and they're tuned to very specific smell. And that smell is called dimethyl sulfide, and it's given off as the body starts to degrade. So when the microbes are spreading all over the body, as a byproduct of their digestion, like an enormous microbial burp, they spit out this chemical, and the beetles are really attuned to it. And they use it to fly around, when they're flying around, to locate a dead body. So that's how they solve that challenge, and then they might meet another beetle on the dead body. It's love at first sight. They lock antennae over a dead body, and then they work together as a team. And so the next challenge they face is how to hide the dead body. So if you had to hide a dead body, how would you do it? You'd bury it. Good answer. How would you bury it? Under leaves, yeah. Would you need any tools?
Shovel.
Shovels, yes. That's how we'd do it. We'd have a spade, we'd dig a big hole. You do what, sorry?
Their hand.
Use their hands, that's right, because they don't have a spade. Shall we see how they do it? We're going to watch a film of exactly how they do it. So Dave, could you play that, please? So first of all, they move the body around a bit, and then they make an incision in the abdomen, and they pull out all the internal organs, and they eat them. And then they shave off the fur. So you see this white stuff that's starting to accumulate on the soil, that's their fur. And then when the body is completely naked, then they start to roll it into a ball. And if we give them enough soil by now, then it would be underground. But we want to see what's going on, so we didn't give them that much. And so you can see this takes us 2 days' work here, condensed into about 30 seconds. And by the end of that time, you can see the beetles have made this beautiful sphere of flesh, and it's glinting slightly in the light because of all the fluids that they've added to it. And so that is how they hide a dead body. And there are lots of reasons for all those different steps in the process, which are all related to the fact that insects use smells to find their body. So if they're going to conceal it from other insects, they've got to get rid of those smells. So the first thing they do is move it. And the reason they move it is because those smells linger in the soil. And so that's like having a giant signpost saying, there's a dead body here, everyone, come and breed on it. So if they move the body, they don't have the signpost for other insects. Then they bury it because all the smells get trapped in the soil. And then they do these other things, removing the guts and shaving it, because that eliminates microbes that are producing the smells. And they add fluids because some of those fluids contain chemicals that kill microbes. So these are all actions that stop the production of more smells and prevent other insects from finding the dead body. So this is a close-up of the beetle's bottom, so you can see the fluids that they produce, and they've got an amazing cocktail of chemicals in them that kill bacteria and fungi. And that helps the beetles hide the body because it helps prevent the production of telltale smells. Right, who knows what this is?
Mummy.
A mummy, yes. What do you know about mummies?
They're from Egypt time.
They are. Anything else you know about them? They're ancient. They say that they're in mummy boxes, yes, and they're from thousands of years ago, and they're still intact. And amazingly, there are lots of similarities between what the beetles do to a dead body to keep it safe for their larvae, and what the ancient Egyptians did to the body of a dead pharaoh to keep it safe. So just like the beetles, who take out the internal organs and eat them, the ancient Egyptians took out the internal organs and put them in these special jars here. And just like the beetles, who put fluid all over the body to prevent microbes from colonizing it, the ancient Egyptians put salt and other chemical fluids on the body to preserve it. So really interesting parallels that humans developed millions of years after beetles evolved these tricks in the first place. Okay, so slightly confusingly, as well as having all these chemicals that kill microbes in their fluids, the beetle fluids also contain some other kinds of microbes. And these are friendly microbes, and they help the beetle on the carcass. And they do that in 2 different ways. So one set of them acts like a kind of chemical warfare wing, and they seek out other microbes and they destroy them with the chemicals that they produce, so they help the beetle in that way. But other microbes start the job of digesting the meat on the carcass and make it easier for the beetles to feed. So making friends is important, and that takes us to the next puzzle of how to defend a dead body against other things that might want to eat it. So the beetle befriends microbes that can help them defend against other microbes, but it also has some friends that can help defend against other insects. Has anyone got any suggestions for what kind of organisms might help defend against other organisms attacking the body? Does anyone think of anything? A bird? No, not a bird. Ladybird would be nice, but no. Yes, what do you think? Blowflies. Well, blowflies are one of the problems that they're trying to see off. So they don't use blowflies to solve that problem. What they actually do is they make friends with this creature here, which is a kind of mite. So these are, if you catch a beetle in nature, then it's probably going to be covered in these little mites. And the mites make friends with the beetles because just like the beetle, they like to breed on a dead body. But unlike the beetle, they can't fly. So they can't find a body by themselves. And so they use the beetle like a private jet to fly around between dead bodies. And so they hop on to a beetle, they hang on to the hairs on the beetle's exoskeleton. They've got specially designed mouth parts for doing this. And then they fly on the beetle, and as soon as the beetle finds a dead body, the mites hop off, and then they breed alongside the beetle on the dead body. And amazingly, their life cycle is timed to be exactly the same duration as the duration of care. So that means that the next generation of mites is ready to hop back onto the adults as they fly off at the end of reproduction. So it's really easy to see why the mite has made friends with the beetle, but you might be wondering, well, why does the beetle put up with this? What does the beetle get out of this arrangement? And it turns out that the mites help the beetle see off rival insects. And you can see that from this plot shown here. So one way they do that is that the mites help the beetles defeat rival beetles that want to come and take the carrion and breed on it themselves. And the mites give the beetle a superpower, so they're more likely to win those fights. And you can see that here. Look, they have 23 fights, 17 of them are won if the beetle carries some mites around. So they give this beetle this special superpower. And the special superpower that they give them, it turns out, is they make them a bit hotter. And we were able to show this with some experiments in our lab where we exercised beetles on a special treadmill that we built. So this is in our beetle gym in our lab. So we had 3 different kinds of beetles. We had beetles that were carrying mites. We had beetles that had nothing on them at all. And then like this one here, we had beetles with a little load of blue tack on them, which is the same as the mass of a bunch of mites. And so in this way, we could separate out whether beetles were getting hotter because they were just carrying a heavy load, or whether the mites were like a big coat and keeping the beetles warm after exercise. And what we found, we used the thermal camera at the end of this exercise period to measure how hot the beetles were. And we were able to see that the beetles that had been carrying the mites stayed hotter for longer because they stayed whiter in our thermal imaging. So the mites help the beetles get hot, and that's really important because if you're a hot beetle, you win a fight. And we were able to show that with an experiment where we just heated up beetles ourselves, and we found that that was sufficient to make them win fights. So mites make beetles hot, and hot beetles win fights, and that's how mites help beetles see off rival insects. And then the mites help beetles in other ways because they eat blowfly eggs. So they take out the competition completely from the outset. So they're very useful friends for beetles to have. And this is a mutually beneficial alliance. The mite gets some transport to a dead body. The beetle gets friends that see off rivals. So finally, we come to this puzzle of how to raise larvae on a dead body. And I thought I'd set the scene for this very final bit of the talk by showing you some home movie of burying beetle family life. So do you want to play that? So this is the nest, the mouse nest, all the larvae nestled within. You can see they're busy munching on the body of the mouse. And then every so often, here comes a parent. They seek out individual larvae, and they make contact with their mouth parts, and they hand over fluid directly to their offspring. And in this way, they look after them. It's very unusual to have an insect that's not a social insect that looks after its babies as well as this beetle does. So if we want to now answer the question of how to be a really good parent, what do you think the things they have to do are? There's some answers here. What makes a good parent in your view? You're the experts in the receiving end of it. What do good parents do for you? Yep.
Feed us,
They,
give shelter.
perfect. Yes, feeding and giving shelter. That's exactly what really good beetle parents do. They make a nice round nest. We know that the rounder the nest is, the more babies the beetles produce. They bite a little hole in it so their larvae can take up residence in it more easily. And then they give their larvae all kinds of special proteins in those fluids that mean that when they're feeding on the mouse's body, they can use them more effectively to grow and develop. But they do one thing that we don't do. It's a bit weird, and that is that they eat some of their babies. So who's got any suggestions for why they might eat some of their babies? Yes, go on.
If they can't find any food, they have to eat them.
Not quite. So remember, they've got this massive mouse they can feed on, so they don't need to eat their own babies to get some food. Yes, have you got a suggestion?
Because there's too many.
Because there's too many, exactly. If there's too many on the mice, on each mouse, there's not enough food to go around for everyone. It's a fixed pot. So if there's many, many mouths demanding food, everyone's only going to get a little bit and it won't be enough. So if they eat just a few, obviously it's bad news for them, but for everyone else that survives, it's great news because then there's more food to go round. And so that's another way in which beetles are excellent parents. All right, so that brings me to the end. This is what we've learned about how to breed on a dead body. We've discovered that to find a dead body, you need to fly around and you need to use smells to locate it. We've discovered that the trick of hiding a dead body from rivals is to remove the smells that it's producing by removing the microbes that are living in and around the dead body. We've seen that to defend the dead body from rivals, you have to make friends, either with microbes or with mites. And we've seen that if you want to bring up offspring really well on a dead body, you can give them a good home and good food, but you might want to eat some spares too. So thank you very much for all your help in undertaking our detective work to put together this instruction manual. And if anyone's got any questions they want to ask, I'll be very happy to answer them. Thank you.
How would you heat them up?
How did I heat them up? We had a lamp that we sat them under in the lab. We didn't put them in the oven.
How big would the body technically have to be? How big is the maximum body?
Yes, a very good question. So most of the dead bodies that they breed on are somewhere between 10 and 25 grams. That's their favourite range. They can go up to about 40 grams, but then beyond that, it's a bit much. Someone told me that they'd seen a video on YouTube of some burying beetles burying a dog. I haven't been able to find that video myself, but that would be fairly extraordinary and kind of beyond their usual range. Yes?
How much food do they eat a day?
How much what food? To look after burying beetles. So we give them, when they're not breeding, we give them mincemeat. And it comes in those little kind of long, thin strands. We give them a strand about like that every week. That's all they need. And then they also get to eat the mouse when they're breeding.
So have the rivals of these burying beetles evolved any symbiotic relationships with other organisms to kind of counteract their superpower?
Yes, that's a very good question. So other Nicrophorus beetles also carry mites around, and they carry that mite species, Poecilochirus caribi, appears to be splitting into different species depending on which species of burying beetle it makes friends with. And the reason for that is that each species of burying beetle has got a slightly different duration of care. And so the mite has to time its duration of its life cycle duration to match those different durations of care. And that's a genetic trait, which means that they have to specialise on using particular host species. So they're all carrying these mites, but they're carrying slightly different subspecies of mites in the warfare between them. Yes?
How long does it take
larvae to get from baby to grown up?
Very good question. So it takes about a week for the larvae to go from an egg to leaving the mouse. And then it takes 10 days to 2 weeks in a pupal stage, and then another couple of weeks till they become adults, and then another couple of weeks to become sexually mature. So it's about 6 or 7 weeks altogether, from egg to adult. There's another question here.
What habitats do they live in?
What habitats? So the ones that we study, which is called Vespuloides, or the common sexton beetle, they live in woods. So any kind of woodland around Cambridge, if we put up a trap, we'd probably catch one of those. But there's another kind that's called Vespulo, not Vespuloides, and that likes to fly around in a more open farmland. So not in woods, but out of that. Most of them like woods. So most of the common five species in the UK are in woodland, but that Vespulo lives on more open farm area.
You know how you said that they had, like, if two met up on one mouse, they would, like, breed and stuff. Do they have specific genders, or are they hermaphrodites?
Do they have specific, genders?
Genders. Like, are they male and female?
Oh, yeah, they're male and female. Yes, I should have made that much
if,
clearer.
If, like, two males came on the same one, would they, like, fight, or...?
You mean if they both turn up together, if you have two males arriving at a dead body together, what happens? Is that what you're asking?
Or...
Yeah? So that's a very good question, and I glossed over that complexity, so it's a great pleasure to be able to tell you about it now. So sometimes you end up getting 4 or 5 beetles all turning up at a dead body. And what happens then is that they organise fights amongst themselves, and the fights are organised within each sex. So the males fight each other, and the females fight each other, and then the winner of those fights ends up being the dominants that own the carcass, and the losers either fly off or they hang around. So a loser male will just hang around furtively in the background and try and mate with a female, and a loser female will hang around and she'll try and sneak her eggs like a cuckoo into the clutch so that the dominant pair raise her offspring for free. Does that answer your question? Yeah. Good question.
What do they drink?
What do they drink? That's a very good question. So I think they don't have a sort of special fluid that they drink, but obviously they're taking in a lot of fluids when they're feeding on flesh. It's a bit mushy and bloody, isn't it? So they would get enough liquid just by doing that. So they don't have a separate cup or something that they drink from, or a pool that they go and drink water from. It's all part of the diet. Good question, though.
What was it that I asked? I can't remember. I know. Does the loser male and a loser female mate?
Yes, they can mate with each other. Yeah, but they don't look after babies together because they don't have a body to look after babies on. So the success of that mating is all dependent on whether the female gets to sneak her egg into the clutch belonging to the dominant. But they do mate with each other. Yes, good point. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Enjoy the rest.